Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Sorry about that. I was muted. I just wanted to welcome everyone to our 6th annual Interfaith Symposium. My name is Jessica Delgado. I am a coordinator at the ADAPT Coalition, and I'm here to welcome you today through our afternoon session. We have Phil McCabe from the Rutgers Center for Public Health Workforce Development going to talk to us about our new normal, managing grief and loss. Our symposium, we usually meet in person. Unfortunately, this year, due to COVID and the situation, we are meeting virtually for 4 weeks in October. This is our 3rd week. And next week, we conclude with our last 2 sessions in our resource fair. The symposium is brought to you by Family Connections ADAPT Coalition, the Interfaith Committee, our partners at the County of Essex, and the Essex County Prosecutor's Office. So for those that might be their first time here with us, just a little bit about us. We are a coalition dedicating to reducing substance abuse and improving the overall health of all residents in Essex County. Our ADAPT Interfaith Committee, we have 4 different committees, and our Interfaith Committee empowers faith-based leaders of Essex County to understand and engage in issues affecting overall wellness in their communities. We have our chairperson, Gwinnera Curry. She's one of our panelists. She's waving right now. Our vice chairman is Michael Doherty, and our secretary is Demetricia Barnes. We also have on the call Joel Torres, manager of ADAPT Coalition as well. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started with today's presentation. Everyone's audio and video are turned off during the presentation. However, feel free to use the Q&A box. Try not to use the chat box to ask the questions, just so we can see the questions clearly. Feel free to use the chat box to let us know other information. We'd like to know who you are. If you can put in there your name, your organization, and what city or state even that you're coming from. If you're out of New Jersey, we'd love to hear from you. We will be going live on Facebook shortly after this slide, and this webinar is being recorded and will be added to our YouTube channel. An evaluation will be available after the webinar finishes. We just ask you to kindly complete it so that we can improve upon our webinars in the future. For coming today, you will receive 2 entries for participating in our webinar and 5 entries for participating in the resource fair, which will be held next October 29th, next Thursday, in the afternoon at 2 p.m. Okay. We'd like you to follow, like, share, and subscribe to us. If you like to, some people like to take pictures of the virtual symposium experience, or even if you want to put a fact or some quote about what you learned today or any of the past days, we would love to hear from you. You can tag us at Essex Adapt on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, and on YouTube as well. Just add the hashtag 2020 Interfaith Symposium. All right. So at this point, I'm going to put us on Facebook Live. Just give me a moment to do that, and then I'm going to present Phil to start our presentation. Welcome to our 6th annual Interfaith Symposium for our Facebook followers. This is our day 3 of our symposium. My name is Jessica Delgado from the ADAPT Coalition, and today we are here with Phil McCabe from the Rutgers Center for Public Health Workforce Development, who's going to talk to us about our new normal, managing grief and loss. The Interfaith Symposium is hosted by Family Connections ADAPT Coalition, Interfaith Committee, the County of Essex, and the Essex County Prosecutor's Office. Thank you for joining us. So Phil McCabe, while he turns it on, is a public health educator with 35+ years experience in community education as a certified social worker, nationally certified addiction specialist, a certified domestic violence counselor, and disaster response crisis counselor.
All right. Good morning, everyone. having good afternoon now. I'm very happy to come back and present again with you a continuation on how we are dealing with the new normal in the events of the pandemic. So today's session, as was mentioned, is going to be focused on grief and loss. You already heard a little bit about me, so enough about that. Just want to emphasize, today's training, there's going to be, of course, managing losses and grief during COVID-19, but also about how we can help ourselves. I think self-care is really an important component of our resiliency. Providing support for family. I'm going to add a few slides for helping young children and then share some other resources for you. But I think what I really want to encourage is that you make use of the chat box and the dialogue box and also the Q&A. We have two different features there. Because at some point I'm going to ask you to generate some of your own ideas. What is working for you in your own faith-based community as far as addressing the needs of your populations, and share some ideas and share some information with each other. I think it's really important. So we're going to try to have a built-in a little collaboration with each other. And then during the end, we'll also do some open discussion Q&A, and we'll encourage people at that point to turn on their video and their microphones so we can have an open conversation. Okay? So I think by now we are all familiar with the difficulties that we're having and how we're seeing basically our whole daily structure has just been changed so drastically. And at the same time, many of us are still responsible to help meet the needs of the public. So how can we do that? Well, first I want to begin by, again, I always like to believe in practicing what I preach, and that's about self-care. We had some nice music playing before. We've been great to get up and dance. And I know in the previous session, I had a little dancing exercise. Today, I just want to, because we're talking about grief and loss, I just want to honor and ask you to take a moment to reflect and just have your own personal invocation with whatever presence, whatever spirit, whatever power is greater than you, that you feel it gives you your sense of strength and comfort during any time, but particularly during this difficult time. Just take a moment and to acknowledge that. And as we do that, I'm just going to go through a rather brief breathing exercise, okay? A little mindful breathing. So just take a deep breath and breathe in. Breathe in and breathe out. Just keep breathing in and breathing out. Make sure you feel the oxygen coming and the air coming into your lungs to its full capacity. And then really push it out so you exhale deeply. Just do that a few more times. And again, I invite you to just make that conscious contact with your own higher power, whatever that may choose to be in your life. And as you breathe in, I just want you to breathe in some good healing qualities, some positive energy, some light force coming into your life. Just keep breathing that in. And then as you exhale, just imagine some of the pain, some of the difficulties, some of the challenges that we have. Just breathe them out. Breathe out that negativity and breathe back in that positive energy. And as we take our last few breaths in this exercise, just give a conscious thank you to your God, the God of your understanding, to your higher power, to your belief, to your support, to the people that are in your life that help you. Just acknowledge that and say thank you. Okay, and we're going to resume. So I use here a quote that it reminds us, grief is like the ocean. It comes on waves, ebbing and flowing. Sometimes the water is calm and sometimes it is overwhelming. But all we can do is learn to swim. And I think right now, A majority of us are probably feeling like we're just barely treading water sometimes. But as we know, as long as we are afloat, even if we are floating and just swimming and paddling and doing with our feet kicking, we are going to be okay. Okay. I'm going to begin with a video, and we did use this before, so hopefully it'll work with the sound.
Do it directly from the web link. Yeah, I see the video and I hear it.
The COVID-19 pandemic is not only a medical crisis, but a psychological one. Along with the collective anxiety, stress, and sadness comes collective loss and sorrow. Loss can shake our senses of self. Many of us will have to cope with the loss of loved ones in the midst of this pandemic. Many are also grieving their sense of safety, of social connection, of financial security. Losing a job, not having a graduation ceremony, not being able to attend a funeral, all are losses to be grieved. What we are experiencing now is a living loss, and as we move forward, people will continue to experience losses we can't yet predict. Psychologists say that in addition to grieving what is now missing from our lives, we may also grieve for the ways in which those losses affect our senses of self and personal identity. If part of who you are is defined by social interactions, what does it mean for you when you are quarantined at home? It helps to name and claim our grief. People often have a vague sense of anxiety or suffering, but putting words to those losses can help them identify ways to move forward. Psychologists recommend journaling to help with this process. Since most of us have never been through anything like this, it can help to explore how you got through another challenging transition, like a divorce or losing your job. How did you heal and recover through that process? You can likely apply some of those strategies to this situation. Social connections are still important. Psychologists encourage people to stay connected with their social support networks through phone calls, text messages, video chat, and social media. For many people, it will take time to recover from their losses. Keep checking in on friends and family members even after this period of isolation ends. Grief is natural, and most people are resilient. Though grief is difficult, it helps to recognize that it's natural and serves a purpose. Grief can help people turn inward and adjust to a new way of life without the people, places, or things they have lost. Research suggests that once a crisis has passed, most people are able to bounce back and move forward with their lives. Know that while grieving, it's normal to fluctuate between moments of sadness and mourning and moments of acceptance or even happiness. It's also important to remember that grief is temporary. The difficult feelings will pass. For more information on how to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, visit APA's Pandemic Resource page.
So I like using that video, and I also imagine that since I'm speaking today to representatives from the faith community, you probably have a lot more extensive training in grief and bereavement than most of my participants in other seminars that I facilitate, and lectures that I give. So I want to honor that also, because I think you know so much about grief and loss, and what I need to do then is kind of move it into what we are dealing with now in our current situation with COVID-19, a pandemic. It's a public health emergency, and what we need to do to help better meet the needs of the community safely, and also with resiliency, how we can remember to take care of ourselves. Taking care of others, taking care of ourselves is going to be an important component here. So as it was mentioned in the video, grief is such a natural process, and often what we tell people is it takes time and time takes time. But what we're dealing with right now is such a disruption that even our point of reference when it comes to time is really distorted. We don't know what our time frame is going to be. Earlier in the video, I think the speaker said something like, when our isolation is over. Well, you know what? When they made that video, they probably thought it was going to be over, but guess what? It's not over. And that's our new reality, and it's not normal. It's okay to feel like this is not a normal situation. What we are dealing with, and I say this many times, the reactions we're having are very normal to a very abnormal situation. We don't go in through life expecting that we're going to be in a global pandemic of this magnitude. We have experienced previous disasters, of course. We've dealt with, Hurricane Katrina and Superstorm Sandy, there's been hurricanes, there's wildfires, you know, what has occurred in our country as far as you know, the Black Lives Matters movement and other components have all kind of brought up some very intense feelings for all of us. And none of us is unscathed during this time. And that's one of the unique characteristics of a global pandemic. A situation can occur, you know, when there's wildfires that are, and they are currently occurring in, say, California. We may have family and friends in California, but we're not directly impacted by the devastation of the fire with our own loss of personal property and other things that we have to deal with, as opposed to those that are residing in California. And of course, I know, yes, we may have family and friends living in California, but we have there, you know, a natural barrier that's in place that we are physically distant from the actual fires themselves. Emotionally, we're not distant, but we're physically distant. And therefore, it's easier for us, because of that physical distance, to move away from it, you know? And as we move away from it, we're able better to focus on ourselves. And then we can go back and go back to viewing some of the other crises in society with a little modulation, I guess I should say, okay? But with the pandemic here, there isn't an area of our lives that has not been affected. Every area of our lives, personally, professionally, family, work, living, faith, everything is all interconnected, and we're all being affected directly by the pandemic. And that's what makes it such, not only such a global event, but many times I believe it's important to remember, as it was shared in that video, what we are dealing with is really an intense loss. It's an intense grief. So we are in a grieving process. If you had a family member or a friend or a loved one who recently has passed away in the past, you know, several months due to COVID-19, you know, our hearts go out for you. And at the same time, even if you didn't have a direct loss, you're still experiencing a grief process right now because of all the other losses that we are experiencing in our society. But the medical emergency has definitely had a major impact. And there's a medical emergency and there's a lot of medical uncertainty. And when there's uncertainty, what often gets triggered is our fight or flight syndrome. Fear comes in and we're not sure if we want to stay and fight or if we want to run away. And it can be very, very challenging because that fight or flight can also overwhelm us and it can filter into other areas in our life. So even the most trained professional is being affected directly by the pandemic. No matter what your role is, again, speaking to the faith-based community, you again have, you know, a lot more training and knowledge around grief and loss and bereavement, but it's also going to be affecting you differently because of not only the multiple death, but the multiple losses that we are seeing, and that is also directly affecting you individually. So it's not just your personal, not just your professional life, it's also within your personal life. You have no choice over that. You can't distance yourself from those losses, but as far as taking care of yourself, that's an important component of self-care and hopefully what we'll be talking about today. So again, those losses are so intense, and at the same time, there's many times that we often look to have a process as we're dealing with a loss, but because of the magnitude of the pandemic. Now, I just, to put up and keep it in perspective, this is the data that came in as of yesterday. For the total number of deaths that have occurred, 220,362, that's nationwide. And then we talk about in New Jersey specific, we have 223,000 cases, but we have confirmed death. We have 14,456 deaths. And that was as of 10 o'clock last night. I didn't add today's numbers. So again, as I'm just kind of not to bring us more down, but it's to validate what we are currently experiencing in all aspects of our lives and what these losses are going to be like for ourselves and also for the populations that we serve in whatever capacity we serve them. So this time of pandemic and the grief that we're feeling, okay, we often look to connect with others during our grief. Even if we feel like we want to be alone or want to be left alone, we still maintain more of an emotional connection and support with others. And we find physical comfort in that. But here we're now being challenged because we're told we have to keep a social distance. But I always want to remind people we are still talking about a physical distance. And even with an immediate family, you know, there's still a gathering. People can come together with a small group and they can keep physical distance. But it is definitely disruption because many of us have experienced losses. Maybe it was a major loss, maybe it was a family member, but it might have been a community member where the whole community turned out to mourn. Or even with a family member, sometimes many different friends and distant relatives and friends you haven't had contact with still might show up for part of the memorial services that take place. And that is not what we're experiencing right now. And our hearts are telling us that we need that. And what we need to do is replicate that in a safer way, which is why practicing good physical distance, but not being socially isolated is really important. Now, we all grieve in our own way, and grief can be very different for everyone. So there's no just one way to grieve or mourn a loss. But there's things that we know that if we talk about them with others, it helps us to find out what is the right way for us, okay? And of course, I'm gonna now switch to you as faith leaders are also responsible to work with the whole person. You know, you may be a hospice worker, but I mean, I'm a social worker by training, and you know, we may be required to do certain things, but we're also, again, just like the pandemic is affecting us in so many components of our life, it's the same thing that the populations that we're working with. We are not just able to work with them primarily in just say one area around their bereavement, when there's so many other components that are having that intersection with their grief process. So we want to maintain that patient-centered approach. We also want to maintain cultural competency. And I believe, I mean, many times we've talked about cultural competency in many different areas, I'm sure. But I'm of a firm belief that right now, it's really significant that we maintain and understand the significance of our cultural competencies because of the differences that we have within our communities. Even members of the community that we might have assimilation with, we might be very familiar with, their grief process can still be very, very different. So I just, as a reminder, kind of put up here this continuum of cultural competency, because if we look at this as a spectrum, okay, that there's that cultural destructiveness, which is kind of really devoid of any respect for the culture and the differences that the people have. And we talk about the differences they have. It can be in their actions, in their customs, their beliefs, their values. Their rituals can all be part of their culture. And they can be based on racial, ethnic, religious, or social groups. But moving from this continuum, we go to where we acknowledge it, but we don't really do anything about it. We sometimes find ourselves being culturally or pertaining to be culturally blind. And then we start moving into a pre-contemplation where we become a little bit more aware and say, you know, I probably should be a little bit more mindful about some of the diversity that I see within the individuals that I'm working with. And we become a little bit more, but we're still contemplating, how do I embrace a culture other than my own? Or even within my own culture, what are some of our value differences? It could be a generational difference. There could be other differences even within a particular ethnic or racial or religious culture. There can still be differences. And then moving into, so how can we not only include those differences and become more competent, so we recognize the differences, and we have to make a very concrete effort to include them. And as we move through this, we also reach then, hopefully, a level of cultural proficiency where it becomes part of our nature that we recognize that in our position, our beliefs are our beliefs, they may not be shared by everyone. So asking someone, taking that patient-centered approach, what is it you think you need right now? What can I do to help you? How can I help you? Is there anything I can do for you? And sometimes people, give us that, oh, no, I'm okay, don't worry about me. It's like, okay, well, there are a few things I can suggest. Maybe, something might trigger you to think about something else. Again, being present with the person is probably the most important thing, but we want to make sure not to impose what we believe they should do onto the individual, because that would be counterindicative of actually being respect for that person-centered approach. So I think that competency level becomes very, very important. And there are other people that don't necessarily embrace the term cultural competency because they're not sure if we're ever really going to meet a competency, but we can practice cultural humility. And cultural humility is the willingness to acknowledge what you know, but then to be learned from someone else what they know and be open to hearing from them and hearing their narrative, listening to their story and asking them, so tell me, what is it for you? And learning from that and being respectful to what they are, learning to listen and being an active listener is very significant when we talk about the grief process, just learning how to listen and not anticipating how we're going to fill in the blank with what might be what we think is a good suggestion for them. And I know sometimes there are individuals that do need a little bit more probably prompting or encouraging, or, sometimes we do have to help someone to find the words. And sometimes, yes, even in cultural competency, language can also be a barrier. The terms that we may use may not be a term that somebody else would appreciate, Even a simple term like a celebration of life, and since many times we are not having what some congregations or groups might call a traditional funeral, and a viewing might postpone that for a celebration of life, and somebody else might take a little like, what are we celebrating? I'm feeling sadness. I don't see a celebration. So just, being respectful of how people within language difficulty or language cultural variations might also be influenced by how it could interrupt their grief process, okay? So there are some activities that some people have found to be a little bit more universal that can help us in this grief process. And again, I'm sharing the ones that I have been familiar with or have utilized more as a social worker, and I'm also a certified addiction counselor, certified in violence and support. But again, I come from that mental health perspective. I have my own spiritual beliefs, and there are times when it's appropriate that I share that, but that's often not what I'm sharing with people I may be working with. That's not really the focus of what I am doing in my interaction. And again, yours comes from a different perspective because you're also uniting people, most of the time uniting people around a shared spiritual belief or some of the common beliefs that they may have. But these are just some of the suggestions that I think are important. And we do recognize that as members of the faith community, you have had to make some major shifts, not only the number of deaths that we've experienced, the number of losses that we've experienced, but then a lot of the restrictions that have been placed upon you, particularly with our rituals around death. This is a good friend of mine and colleague, Reverend Michael, who early on was asked to give, last rites. And a few times in the beginning of the pandemic, he was able to go into a nursing home and he was able to, put on a mask, and he kept the distance. And then it got to the point where the nursing home said, we can't have anyone come in, And here they were able to set up a phone system, and he was able to give the last rites through the window. The patient in the room, and the family member who was allowed to be in the room with them at least acknowledged that it was happening and was able to kind of ease that. And I'm sure it was challenging for Michael also, because his own personal process would be there not only to anoint with the oils, but to also hold the person's hand and ease their transition, and to give the family member a hug, and to ask them to share some thoughts and some ideas about the person. But none of that was, was actually directly into the ritual, but he had to adapt, and he still had to practice in his faith the performance of the last rite ritual. And I'm just using that as one example. I know in any other religion, there are many other religions, there's other types of rituals that are utilized, and they've all had to be modified by you, the leaders of the faith communities. Going back to for the family members too, how are they going to be able to create their memorials, or what have they been doing? You know, so there's a couple, and again, it's important. I know I say this more than once. Remember, we are talking about physical distance, not social distance. Even though the news is always telling us keep social distance, it's keep physical distance. We can have social interaction, particularly safely, like we are doing here today. This symposium, yes, I would love to be able to talk with you and sit in a group, and we can do the whole circle thing and sharing and talking and laughing and crying. And now we're doing it virtually, you know, on a laptop. I'm in my home, you're in yours, but at the same time, we are able to do it. So we can help people with the new normal, okay? We have many different tools now that have been developed that have helped people virtually with their grieving process. Okay. These are just some of them. I'm not doing any commercial, you know, advocating or promotion of any particular one, but there's forums, there's online memorials, there's the Pine Trust Shrines. People are, different ways people are memorializing their loved ones. They're using some of their groups that they use virtually online. There's several groups that have been set up specifically around grief and loss. There's Tweets to Remember, MySpace Death, and then also Facebook Memorial Page. And that can be family members or friends can create a page to honor a loved one, or if the person who passed away and they know that, and they're sick and they know that their pending death is coming, they can also designate someone to be their bereavement contact, their survivorship for their Facebook, so they can either take it down or update people about circumstances of the person's illness and or their pending death or the actual death that does occur. I know for me, and I do like being on Facebook, but I get a little frustrated when someone says, hey, so-and-so is celebrating a birthday, wish them a happy birthday. And I'm like, they died 2 years ago. Stop telling me that they're celebrating their birthday. Or they miss hearing from you. And I'm like, I miss hearing from them. You know, now at one time, those Facebook prompts seemed very appropriate, but in this time they're not. So people are learning how to dismantle them and at the same time still to create their memorials using their online presence. And that's just one. I mean, there's others that we can use, and we'll make sure you get a copy of the PowerPoint. You'll get a copy of a PDF file and a printout of some of the resources that I'm going to be talking about today. I just want to acknowledge that also. Okay. Moving away from the digital world, and remember, sometimes we really, you know, having that physical connectiveness is also important to our memory and to our grief, okay? So planting a living memorial can be very, very helpful. A tree, a shrub, doing it community-wise, if there's an open space that people can use it, or just doing it in a personal space, as your own backyard or a neighborhood, or even just a field of wildflowers, just, you know, spreading out some seeds and things like that can be very, very helpful. The important thing is that it's also one of the rituals that can be very, very positive for children to be involved in, because they can make that connection, you know, to creating a memorial for someone and sharing in the process, which I think can be, again, helping children in the grief process and the bereavement process is really important. Now we are dealing with the holiday season upon us. I know, 2 weeks ago I did it on rituals, and we talked about the Halloween and the Thanksgiving and the holidays and everything else that's coming up and how we can kind of celebrate. But for some people, celebration might not be what they're actually feeling right now, you know. So, and we do know that this is not just for the pandemic right now, but many times when people are feeling grief and loss, particularly in the first year, there's anniversary dates and there's holidays that do occur that can be more difficult. A Mother's Day, a Valentine's Day, a Christmas Day, Thanksgiving, Kwanzaa, whatever it may be, you know, that connects you to that person, to that memory, can have major significance. And the first time you're experiencing it without the person can also be very, very kind of compound some of the emotions that we're having. And the thing is, okay, what we try to do is we really try to avoid the grief, but it's not the grief we need to avoid, it's just the pain. You know, we don't want to feel the pain, but we know that there is a loss in our lives, and that's part of what we need to acknowledge And by doing something to honor that, it'll help us each time. And sometimes for some people, it may actually take, when we say time takes time, I know people that might take 3 years of an anniversary before they actually feel an emotional shift. It doesn't, so there's no direct time. Well, the reason why I say it could take 3 years, because some people think, oh, I made it through, you know, whatever. I already had Mother's Day, so why am I worried about Christmas? Mother's Day was always a much more important holiday, and I made it through that. So Christmas is always a fun time for my family. Why am I? Because again, you haven't gone through it yet. So once you go through it once or twice or 3 times, we seem to kind of learn what we need to do during that time. Okay, but it's also acknowledging that, you know, grief is our internal feelings, and then mourning is our external expression. What we can do to let some of those feelings out, and to do that in a way that becomes either physical or external for us, becomes important. But as I said, the new normal is definitely not normal. I think it's important that if we can name it, the better we can manage it, which is why it's important that we do recognize and call this the grief, and grief is what it is, it's grief. There's a couple websites I want to highlight that I rely on. These are just some of many, so you may have your own, and again, we'll be happy to facilitate, have you sharing different resources, okay? But it helps us to have a basic understanding of grief, and I know that you probably have more than a basic understanding, but I think what I'm saying is, at times like this, we need to help the individuals that we are working with to also have a better understanding of grief. And I think what is happening, because of the multiple losses that our country and our world is experiencing, people are trying to minimize their own grief because they know their situation is not much different than somebody else's. I don't know if that really, but it's like, well, I feel bad, but then so-and-so, they lost their grandparent, they lost their son, they lost their daughter, they lost their neighbor. And, you know, many of us are feeling it. That doesn't mean that yours isn't yours, you know? So we need to help people to understand that grief is part of their process, and it's also part of their individual process. And there are also ways that as a community, we can help support each other when we're grieving. And sometimes a person that's experiencing grief actually does better when they are connected to someone else who has experienced a loss. We see this we have the mother-to-mother connection, where we know that mothers who have lost a child, or if there's been sudden infant death syndrome, they can relate well to another mother who is dealing with that same type of a loss, much different than, say, an adult child who is talking about the loss of a parent who died when they were well into their, I don't want to say an age, you know, like 80 or 90 years old. That is a little bit more expected, and people might be a little bit more familiar with it. But the loss of an infant, particularly sudden infant death, can be very, very devastating. Both are painful, but one is a little bit more expected. So therefore, those two individuals are not really homogenous. Yes, they have both felt the loss and they're feeling grief, but the circumstances are so different. So their needs are going to be different. So helping people, again, to recognize that we can keep our physical distance, but we can still have our social connectedness needs to be important. And the other thing is that we don't want to just kind of sweep it away and act as if it's not really affecting us, when we know, and again, I think I'm preaching to the choir, to use the acronym, that, you know, if we ignore it, it's only going to come back and haunt us later. So again, going back to some of the resources online, you may be familiar with Dave Kessler. If anyone who's ever taken a course in grief and bereavement, they've learned about Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. I remember going through training with, not her, but I mean about grief and losses, particularly as a social worker, and also in the very beginning of the AIDS epidemic. We did a lot of grief work. So David Kessler was a student of Dr. Ross's and became a colleague. They actually co-authored several books together. So he's kind of carrying on her legacy, but he also incorporates his own beliefs into it, okay? And I like how he has summarized this. So I'm just gonna read this particular slide because he's talking about what we're experiencing right now in our pandemic. It is grief, We're feeling a number of different griefs. We feel the world has changed, and it has. We know this is temporary, but it doesn't feel that way. And we realize things will be different. Just as going to the airport is forever different from how it was before 9/11, things will change, and this is the point at which they change. The loss of normalcy, the fear of economic toll, the loss of connection, this is hitting us and we're grieving. Collectively, we are not used to this kind of collective grief in the air. And I 100% agree with David in this position, that what we are feeling is such a magnitude, it's like nothing we've ever experienced before. You know, I've had friends, I'm from a generation where we lost many people to war, and many people to AIDS. I've lost friends to addiction, but the magnitude, not to minimize those losses either, and we're currently dealing with, let's say, the opiate epidemic. More people are dying of overdoses than ever died of before. But at the same time, we're not talking about one particular group or one particular time frame or time period. We're talking collectively how it's affecting all of us. Now, David also reminds us that one of the things we knew that's important to us as far as resiliency is regaining a sense of the things that we do have the ability to basically change. I'm sure you're all familiar with the serenity prayer that we learn, you know, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. We can't change everything. The courage to change the things I can. There are things we can change. And of course, the wisdom to know the difference, which is sometimes the most important. So again, this is just another slide that I want to read in its entirety. I try not to do that as an educator, but the way he captures this, I think is really important. And remember, Dr. Kubler-Ross never said these stages were going to be linear, that you go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. You know, it's just a process that we might go through. And some people kind of jump around them a little bit. Some people go from 1 and all the way over to 4. And then, you know, it doesn't matter. It's just identifying that there's certain stages that we might find ourselves in. So as Dr. Kessler compared this to the COVID pandemic, he said, there's denial, which we said a lot early on. This virus won't affect us. And then there's anger. You're making me stay home and taking away my activities. Then there's bargaining. Okay, if I social distance for 2 weeks, everything will be better, right? And then there's sadness. I don't know when this will end. And then finally, there's acceptance. This is happening. I have to figure out how to proceed. Acceptance, as you might imagine, is where the power lies. We find control in acceptance. I can wash my hands. I can keep a safe distance. I can learn how to work virtually. And I believe we can also learn how to practice our faith safely. Going back to some of the resources here, okay. Again, I'm just going to incorporate that some of the holiday traditions that we have might be difficult for some people. And I think that we can be open to sharing with people in their grief and help them to make decisions of what's going to be perhaps best for them, not what we think they should do again. And also, as we're going to talk about, it's okay to change your mind. I think many people that sometimes feel obligated during their grief because there are people that are trying to help them or offering them compassion, and they feel more that they have to follow through with these other people. No, no, no. What they need to do is they need to do what's right for them. Okay, so I just want to take a look at some of them. Okay, and the first one is it's okay to cancel the holidays. Yes, the date is going to come. Okay, there will be a December 25th. Whether you acknowledge it as Christmas or not, if that's part of your faith, that's going to be up to you. And then how you acknowledge it is also going to be up to you. And if you don't feel like celebrating Christmas this year, that's okay. You can celebrate it next year, you know. And again, please be respectful. I'm trying to be respectful. I'm using that as one particular holiday. I know it's not universal. There are other holidays that are also going to be celebrated, okay? But then for some people, it's part of that continuation of life. Like the holidays is something that brings us together. So I do want to continue something with the holidays. I'm just not sure what it is, okay? So leaning on friends, leaning on family, leaning on virtual support can be very important during the holidays if that's what you feel you need. If you feel you need a little time alone, then that's okay also. So there's different ways we can find comfort. And again, I'm just using some of this information from grief.com. That's Dr. Kessler's website. So you can go to his website and get a lot more. I'm just kind of giving you a very abridged version of it. The other thing that's talked about is, what about having option B? Okay, what else can you do? Maybe you're used to doing certain things a certain way. What about doing something different? What's going to be right for you? So having a plan B. And some people find that emotionally, just knowing they have another option is all they need to know. Whether they follow through on that plan B or not, if the idea of going to the family gathering, and again, I'm talking about a safe small group of individuals that are meeting and practicing, safety, doesn't even feel comfortable to them, just knowing, hey, if I don't want to do that, I could always, go and do this. I have a good friend. I remember that she was an older woman who lived alone. She didn't have children of her own. She said sometimes it was overwhelming how many people from her church invited her to dinner, and she said, sometimes I just don't want to go. She said, I have nieces and nephews, they're older now. When they were younger, I would go and stay the holiday with them and it's nicer when it's you. But sometimes being with total strangers and their family for a holiday, and I'm just sitting there like I'm Mrs. So-and-so, some people like that. She didn't. And she goes, I'm very happy. She says, I went to the diner and I ordered myself a little turkey platter. I'm going to have some turkey and I'm going to have some mashed potatoes. I'm going to go home. There's a show I want to watch on TV. I'm going to make a few phone calls. It's my day. I don't have to spend it with everybody. And she said, and she was jokingly saying to me, she says, I get 3 invitations. I tell them each I'm going to somebody else's house. She says, God forbid they all talk and say, oh, how did so-and-so like her holiday meal with you? And she goes, then I have to make up another excuse. But the point is, okay, she recognized that she needed to have a plan B. People thought she should have been more than happy and pleased to be invited to, and she was some days, but there were other times in her life where she just didn't feel the need to be there. So having that plan B can be very, very important. And sometimes plan B is going to be your own personal way of connecting with the loss or with the person that you're feeling the loss from. So you can also try the holidays in a new way, okay? Determine for yourself what it is that you want to do for a particular holiday during a holiday season. And maybe some of our traditional rituals are not being done, but we can incorporate some new ones, okay? And always be mindful, again, when it comes to grief, you have the right to change your mind, okay? You can decide what you want to do. You don't have to be obligated or forced to do something that you're uncomfortable with. And I know, and yes, sometimes we do need to give people a little encouragement, but there's a big difference between giving someone encouraging and then pushing them over the edge, okay? There are ways that we also remember that, what we're feeling is our emotions. Our grief is how we externally can kind of bring that out. So there's different ways we can also give a time and a place to honor the losses that we have, okay? We can do that physically, saying a prayer before the holiday dinner, talking about the loved one, asking people to share stories about them, tell us their favorite story. Does anyone remember what, Uncle Joe's favorite joke was? Okay. Lighting a candle, doing something more symbolic, doing the online tributes are also important, doing the online connectiveness. And then remembering them, if you do go to a place of prayer, to honor them in prayer service, but also just chatting with others online can be very, very important. And let the person know. I mean, I have a good friend who lost her son, and she lets me know when she needs to talk about it. And she also lets me know when she doesn't want to talk about it. And I respect both of those decisions. I don't always have to assume that she wants to talk about it at a particular time, where maybe she's like, no, I wasn't really thinking about him today. I was kind of enjoying the sunshine. I was going to go and, do whatever. And now, well, somebody just reminded me, So again, it's respecting the boundaries, respecting the differences, and respecting the individual's choices that they make becomes important. There are some basic do's and don'ts that are also offered us by Dr. Kessler, okay? And I think it's really important that it emphasizes taking care of yourself is also important, okay? So sometimes a family member can be more concerned about taking care of whatever the grief ritual or memorial or meal or whatever it's going to be for everybody else, forgetting that they're also part of that process. And I know in some situations we do have people that are more independent, that are on the outer circle, that kind of move into that place, okay? But it's important that whoever has experienced that grief gives themselves the time that they need. There's no time limit. You know, if you have 500 tears to cry, don't stop at 250 because you need to keep going, you know. But allowing others to help is also important, you know. Again, not forcing something on somebody, but saying, I would really like this if I could. Is it okay with you to do this and to share this or to do this for you? Or let me do this in memory of the person because I'm also doing it to deal with my grief and loss, you know. And sometimes just being there is important too. Maybe you don't need to do anything. I'm going to show a video towards the end that talks about how we can develop a better understanding of empathy, okay? But it's also important in grief that we acknowledge children, that children are feeling the loss also. And many times we often, I know I was from the generation, I was raised in the generation where children were kind of not included in the grief process. Sometimes we went to a funeral and sometimes we were thought too young, but we didn't know where, you know, aunt, uncle, grandmother was, or even mom or dad or brother or sister or neighbor. And it was very confusing sometimes if people gave us misinformation. So I think we've learned a lot about helping children to deal with grief as far as age-appropriate conversation. But let's remember that they are also experiencing living and growing up during a pandemic. So their understanding of death is also being overshadowed by the current situation with the pandemic, which could create more fear for them. You know, if 2 years ago, a family member's cancer diagnosis was discussed with them and explained to them that the doctors has done everything they could, and, you know, unfortunately, you know, grandma is probably not going to be with us much longer, so let's do something nice for her. Let's go visit with her, spend a little time. You know, that's all helping someone anticipating a death. But now we're dealing with the death occurring from COVID. So it's not just elderly, and children are finding out that neighbors, schoolmates, relatives, people they know, people they play with, live with, whatever, are dying, and it can be scary to them because they think, well, if they got sick, am I going to get sick too? And maybe, you know, again, we have to be age appropriate in our conversation with children. And I have a great resource on the end I'm going to share with you about helping children to address panic and fear and anxiety during COVID-19. Okay. And again, so helping children to deal with grief is also going to be part of the process that we need to acknowledge and be mindful of. And remember that for many times, children really kind of benefit, whether maybe their intellectual capacity to connect to the grief isn't similar to an adult, but they can acknowledge the pain of the loss, and they also can benefit from having a physical outlet to let that out, and what they can do to express some of that loss and sadness for them. So there's some particular suggestions. Now I'm going to move to another website. This is the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. Okay. And again, this network has been in existence, I think, well over 35 years. But they had to update a lot of their information, and they've done a lot to kind of be specific now on dealing with COVID-19. So you'll get a copy of this, and you can go to their website. There's like a fact sheet that gives us some pointed information to discuss when working with children during the pandemic. These are just some of the suggestions. I'm just going to highlight some of them, you know. Whatever the child is feeling, you know, sad, angry, hurt, lonely, etc., it's okay to feel that, you know. And that, yes, I get upset too, you're going to get upset. We're going to both have to explore our feelings and allow those feelings to come to the surface. But also, it's recommended that we give accurate information, okay? And accurate information, I always say, it's age appropriate, but we want to make sure that the child understands what is happening around them, and also why, because we're also, you know, I'm a public health professional in addition to be a social worker, why they need to practice their physical distance, why they need to wear their mask, why they need to wash their hands, why they can't go to certain activities at certain times, you know, is going to help them. not to create more fear, but just to be realistic with them. And as I talked about, 2 weeks ago, so yes, we're going to modify some of the normal rituals that children might have around the holidays with something that's going to be appropriate during the pandemic, but also know for some of the children, if they've experienced a loss, that modification is also going to take another meaning and a different approach for them. Might need a different approach for them. So I have another resource to share with you, and that's from the National Alliance for Grieving Children. And again, my experience is in working with children, sometimes I am amazed at the strength that children have, the resiliency that they have, but also the insight that they have, and I've worked with many adults too. I'm just saying, like, I'm one that tries to be very aware of my interaction with younger people and what they're experiencing and what it has meaning and value in their life. So here's some different toolkits, again. This toolkit is also available in Spanish, which can also be very, very helpful. And you can get it for free. You can just download it. You go to this website, childrengrief.org, and you can click on either the Spanish version or the English version. In that, you'll see some activities that can be beneficial to working with children, So here's your rainy day picture, what do you do when the sun's out and what do you do when it's cloudy and rainy? And how are your feelings similar? Talking about and coloring or drawing or using shapes or colors or symbols or pictures to express my fear. And then also acknowledging what helps, what helps me when I'm feeling fear, And children, again, sometimes it's easier for a child to draw a picture. It's not about having them become Picasso. It's about having them be able to put emotions on paper so visually they can communicate. And again, I think of, well, hopefully we all know, if the picture looks funny to you, that doesn't mean it was funny to the child, So we should never make fun of someone's art, particularly when we're talking about helping with their grief process, because again, it could have, and that can be for adults also. That's not to say at some point, if somebody does laugh over a picture and say, well, I was trying to draw a tree, but it looks more like a dragon. Well, okay, and they chuckle, then you can chuckle and say, yeah, I see that. That's not really a tree, but why are you choosing to draw a tree? Tell me about the tree. What does it mean for you? So there's different ways it could be opened up. And of course, there are also registered art therapists and expressive art therapists who are trained in using the creative arts process with children in our support groups that are being facilitated, even online. But these are some of the things. This handbook particularly is just a book that you can use at home, or you can use in your congregation, or pass out to family members, let them know about it. It's a resource for them to use. This is just 2 of the pages. It's like 36 different pages, I think. I do, since I work in public health and I work with a lot of first responders and first receivers or medical professionals, you are now also being challenged. So I'm not speaking to the first responders and first receivers. I'm talking to the faith community, because you are dealing with individuals who their call to duty has also put them in a vulnerable position, and lives have been lost. So the line of duty deaths that we're experiencing from our medical professionals, from our police, our fires, our EMTs, from teachers now, and even from ministers and priests and rabbis, it's all part of our line of duty that, and our grief then is going to be slightly different, okay? But I believe that if you remember the earlier slide about our cultural competency, sometimes we need to look at certain professions as how a person relates to their culture. So you as a faith leader may connect with others in the faith community and recognize that culturally you have some common denominators. You may not represent the same religious or theology beliefs, but your life purpose can be very, very similar, and you relate to that and share that with each other. So when I always like the saying, when one of us falls, any of us can stumble. So we have to be mindful and supportive. And I think that I know, just like healthcare workers have stood up and stood in for others, I think the same thing's happening in our faith communities also. I know many groups that are trying to help each other and help other congregations or temples to do what they need to do, both virtually and whatever other way they can. But that's all about the uniqueness of some of the positions that we have. And it's no different. I can put myself in the category of being a member of a mental health profession as a social worker and as an addiction counselor. I know we have some other counselors here on the webinar. Our needs are also going to be slightly different, you know, because most of the time our role is spent helping to take care of others, and being told we have to take care of ourselves can sometimes be a real challenge. So we have to be mindful and supportive of each other during these difficult times. So we are essential workers, you know. There are times that when we talk about essential and the critical infrastructure of workers, you know, that has changed so drastically from what the original model is and what we're seeing now. And definitely members of the faith community, to me, are part of that critical infrastructures, because not only are you in a position to help with the healing and the ministry that you provide, but you're also in a position where you can also help with the education that is necessary. So going back to anyone that might be connected to a particular line of duty, okay, and we recognize that they have different ways of being memorialized. This is from the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund. So again, there might be members of your congregation that work in law enforcement, and their family could be struggling with how they're going to acknowledge. And so, you know, they keep there's a memorial wall in Washington, D.C., but they also have a virtual one that you can light a candle at if you go to their virtual website. So that's for law enforcement. There's one also for Fallen Firefighters Foundation. They have a memorial also, but they're also doing a fallen hero, fire hero virtual website that it can be beneficial. And again, if you're not traditionally working with line of duty death, but then a member of your group comes forward and talks about the loss of a loved one who also contracted COVID or sustained an injury in their line of duty, recognize that their death ritual is going to be slightly different. So keeping that in mind, and this goes back to that vulnerability that many children feel, sometimes children of first receivers can be very scared about what's happening around them and questioning, well, why is mom and dad going out of the house? Or why is aunt or uncle not here? Why are they doing it? And that can, I imagine too, for those of you, the family members in the faith community also might be challenged by some of your, do you really have to keep doing that? And maybe you are doing it safely, but again, what they're saying is make sure if the children that you're in contact with in your own personal life, know that whatever you are doing, if it's your call to duty to minister, that you're also doing it safely. You're not going to throw caution to the wind. You're going to do what you can safely, keep your distance, keep your physical distance, wear your mask, use your hand sanitizer, just like they're encouraged to do when they're at home, or if they were going back to school, you're going to do that in the performance of your ministry. So, you know, again, there's some more recommendations. I'm not going to read each of these, but you'll have this handout. You can go to this particular website. Okay, and again, it's emphasizing that keeping the connection is what's really important. We may not have the physical connection, but we can definitely have the social connection, which can help us in our emotional connection. There's a few more, excuse me, a few more areas I want to talk about, which have kind of come front and center now when we're talking about grief, and that is the death of a coworker. You might work in a smaller area. Maybe you have 5, 6 people that you actually consider your coworkers. So the ratio of perhaps one of them dying, you know, is only going to be, again, I'm not putting a number on them. It doesn't make any difference. But the point is that now we're seeing we can be in an environment and we're not only losing our family and friends and members, but we're losing some of our coworkers. And the death of a coworker is slightly different. Okay. So I'm just going to give you some recommendations on dealing with the death of a coworker. And again, I could be talking about another religious leader, or a person that you're ministering to could come to you and say, why am I feeling so upset? It's not like it was a personal friend of mine. It's just a woman that was in my office, and we haven't even been in the office in several months. And I heard that, her husband passed away. So why is it affecting me this way? Again, because you're connected to them through your work and the death of it, or could be the coworker. So it doesn't have to be someone that you're in direct contact with, but it has to do with how our work environment is also being affected. So we talk about our personal life, our professional life, and our home life is also being affected. So the first thing, if someone comes to you about the death of a coworker, if you're experiencing the death of a coworker, okay, recognize that not everyone is going to be as close to that person as you may be or as others may be. So you want to respect the different types of relationships that are established in a workplace or the people that we interact with. Okay, when I think of the workplace, my work as an educator for a state university, I'm in contact with hundreds of people each year. When I hear of someone that, so again, a loss can affect me very differently. That doesn't mean that it still doesn't affect me, but it's not the same as if it's someone in my personal life. But the point is that we can respect each other's differences as far as how we connect with our coworkers or employers or employees, okay? And also respect that as each of us grieve differently, our connectiveness to that person can also be different. We also want to respect the coworker's privacy. Maybe there are details about their personal life that they didn't bring into the work environment. And now post-mortem, we want to respect that if they didn't share it with you then, why do you need to share? It doesn't need to be shared now, I know many people that have found out details of a coworker only by reading the obituary. I had no idea they had 5 children and they only talked about 3 of their children. Well, maybe they were, 2 children maybe had moved on or weren't talking to them or whatever. We don't know what the circumstances were. Or maybe the children were placed in foster care, were adopted children, whatever. But, we don't know those details till whoever wrote the obituary. And sometimes obituaries are not correct information. But again, if we don't know someone personally and we need an obituary, we get some different details. I had a family member that was left out of the listing in the obituary and they took it very personal, and others, it was just, we don't know how it happened. We apologize, but that person took it very personal. But again, I'm just saying that sometimes we need to that was a family issue we had to deal with, but it can also happen with coworkers that sometimes we may not know, well, I said, we don't know all the details of their personal life. And then post-mortem, we do hear a lot more than sometimes they might've wanted to share with us. So you respect the relationship, okay? Also, don't expect that every one of your coworkers or everyone that has contact with necessarily wants to talk about it. Some people are like, it's not really, I'm not feeling anything really other than, hey, I'm sorry to hear that, but, I'm just here kind of doing my job. I want to get back to work, whatever. And others might want to talk about it. It's always asking when to talk about it. Would you like to talk about it? We had a loss of a coworker in my unit, and we did spend time talking about it. It was a voluntary thing, but we went online and we talked about, and we also respected the family and their wishes, So mutual support still can be important, and even acknowledging that while it may not seem like we're in a close, intimate relationship with that person, think of how many hours a day we often typically would spend with coworkers. We sometimes see them more often than we might see a relative. So that could have a major impact on a loss or a grief. There are times that a group might decide to honor the person, honor a coworker. Sometimes by giving back, by doing something formally or informally, either sending something to the family, making a contribution, a food basket, or donating something in their name, okay? It can all be part of the symbolism that we use in dealing with our grief, okay? And also recognize that it's not uncommon, and particularly with the multiple griefs that we're feeling, the loss of a coworker can actually trigger some connective to another loss we've had in our life that perhaps we didn't think about at the time or weren't thinking about at the time, but now it's coming up. So we have that with any kind of grief. Someone talks about a grief, it's not uncommon for us to be triggered into a memory or a thought of someone else, okay? The important thing is that if your grief feels like it is overwhelming you, that you reach out for support. And I think sometimes, again, as providers, we're the ones that people will be reaching out to, and we want to be respectful of whatever pain they are feeling, even in situations where sometimes it may not be something that we closely identify with, but it doesn't mean that for them it isn't real. I'm going to end with another video. Gosh, I try, I know. We're going to go to this video. It's probably a little bit more familiar. This is Dr. Brene Brown. And it's about a 3-minute video on empathy and how empathy can help and the things we don't want to do when we're trying to offer compassion to someone. So let's see if we can get this to work.
So what is empathy and why is it very different than sympathy?
Yes.
Okay.
Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Okay, you may have seen that already. I think it's very appropriate for this particular topic to bring us into a perspective on the things that we can do, what helps, and sometimes what doesn't help, okay? And we're going to be moving into, I'm just going to show a few more slides and we're moving into our conversation. So if you haven't, I'm not able to see, when I have my computer screen open, I don't get to see any comments or questions or anything. So I know Jessica is probably keeping an eye on that, but we will be moving into, and Garan is also going to be helping us, so we'll moderate that. But if you have any questions, now's a good time to make sure you put them into the chat, into the question box, so we're able to get to them, okay? Here's again, some websites that might help you as far as creating virtual funerals. You may have already been challenged in your own congregation or group to do that. But it's also good to share that information with others. But again, I want to emphasize, one of the major components of resiliency is that we remember to practice self-care and taking care of ourselves, And I really emphasize limiting the COVID-19 updates becomes important. I'm a public health professional. I'm supposed to be up, and I am. I mean, we had a meeting yesterday with Judy Pescatelli from the director, but at the same time, knowing that I was going to be in a meeting with her virtually, I didn't have to listen to the news that day. I didn't need to get a triple dose. Something in the morning, or maybe something in the afternoon, something towards the end of the day, but I don't end the night with COVID-19 news. I end the night with a comedy show, even if it's a rerun, because I need to have that balance in my life, okay? Using credible sources. Can't emphasize that enough. As a public health professional, I'm very, very comfortable reminding people that science is real. Let's listen to the scientists, okay? But also remember to take care of your body. Staying connected and then practicing precautionary measures. You, by your faith, is not going to be immune. If you believe that, I'm sorry, there's also a bridge somewhere I could sell you to, okay? It may protect you. I'm not minimizing what people rely on with their faith, but we're talking about a virus that does not discriminate and doesn't choose which person becomes infected, just like the AIDS virus, okay? So it's about making the right choice. And not only do we make the right choice, but I won't say I'm challenging you, but I'm honoring and acknowledging you as members of the faith-based community, as leadership within your community, from faith-based or from social service agencies. You need to make the right choice, and you need to help the people that you're in contact with also make the right choices. So, you know, CDC, I can, as a public health professional, I'm very comfortable saying, let's do what CDC tells us to do. Stay home if you're sick. Do not enter the building if you have a fever or cough or shortness of breath. Make sure you get checked out by a medical professional. We're encouraging people, you know, there are times that people need to be tested, but they also need to practice social distancing, practicing hand washing, hand sanitizer, face mask. You know, it's very unfortunate that right now, a public health issue is becoming more of a political issue. And in a political issue, it's also becoming more of a religious battle. We don't need to be fighting it. We need to be recognizing how significant it is that we adhere to safer guidelines so that we all can survive this to the best of our ability. But unfortunately, that's not always happening, okay? But I, again, think that you in your capacity has the importance of spreading that word. Some of the online support groups that I didn't get to mention yet, okay, that might be helpful. And again, for some, it's because they're specific to gender or to relationship or to culture or community. You'll get a copy of all this too. There's so many different, we're fortunate now, I believe, because we are all becoming much better at using the internet than we ever were before. I had friends that would go, as soon as their workday was over, they would never open up a phone or a laptop at home to check on things. Like, oh, I'm off, I'm not. But now we're like, you know, it's part of it. For some of it's our second nature, but again, moderation, balance. But from that, we also have a lot more different resources now. That it's so much easier to find support in the virtual world. I mentioned about children. Now, I think I mentioned this once before in our summer presentation, but I just want to re-emphasize that for working with children, they have specific needs. So Sesame Street is a wonderful, wonderful show in itself. And they've done a lot to deal with a variety of issues that children and young adults deal with, and even family and parents deal with. But they have a specific website and resource list for dealing with COVID-19. So it's, if you go to sesamestreet.org, that's their main website, but you put in /caring, and it's specific information about COVID-19, including some discussion points, some video clips you can see. The characters themselves talk about hand washing and wearing masks and losses and not being able to go out like they could, go to school or go to the playground, whatever. So it's a wonderful website to help children. Support for you is also important. So, you know, you pass on this information to your the folks that you're working with. New Jersey, we've been working very hard. Our disaster tourism branch, our mental health branch, our New Jersey Hope and Healing, and the New Jersey Department of Human Services have all come together. So we have free counseling services available for mental health counseling. You can call or text NJ Hope, and it's 7 days a week, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. If you call after hours, you can leave a voice message, but it's easier to just call back during those hours. And you can if you have a minor difficulty that you're experiencing, you can definitely call and talk to a trained counselor. Anyone who answers the phone is a trained counselor. It's not it's not necessarily a switchboard person who's only taking messages like an answering service. It's a trained counselor will pick up the phone and or call you back if you leave a number, and you let them know that they can leave a message on your cell phone if they're calling you back or in your voicemail. But the point is, in addition to that brief, say 15-minute conversation, if after talking to them you think you could benefit from having ongoing support, the state will arrange for you to have telephonically crisis counseling or mental health counseling. I think it's up to it's either 6 or 8 sessions. So they'll do full, 45, 50 sessions with you scheduled for you maybe once a week or even twice a week if you're dealing with a crisis situation by a trained professional who is specifically trained in mental health and COVID-19 to help you during this time. So that's a free service we're offering in our state. There is also an information line. If your question is more of a practical sense or a medical sense, there's another number that you can go to the health department, New Jersey Health Department. You can check with the New Jersey Department of Health, or you check with your local health department. We have local health departments that are regional, city-based, or county-based. So find out which one in your area. There's 130, I think, different health departments. But call the state one, but a lot of times they'll refer you to, because if you're asking about, say, a testing site or something else, it's better to reach the local health department. But as far as for a mental health issue, this is the universal number that we're using in our state. There's also services that have been adapted for our hearing impaired individuals to receive support. Our suicide helplines, we have the National Suicide Helpline, and we have the New Jersey Suicide Prevention Line. As I mentioned before, some individuals prefer to connect with someone who they feel a stronger connection to because of their similarities. We have the New Jersey Vet to Vet, New Jersey Connect for individuals in recovery, the COVID information line. There's 2 lines, one for medical, one for general. We have the Cop to Cop. We have the Trevor line, which is an LGBTQ health line. And then we have the Mom to Mom helpline. So there's others too, but these are the main ones that I often get asked. Is there anyone that can talk to me that is a little bit more familiar with my issue? I'm a veteran. I've already been diagnosed with PTSD, and now I'm feeling this with COVID. So yeah, we do have a vet-to-vet helpline that might be beneficial to you. On a state level, we have an app that can help you. You can download COVID Alert. So you go to covid19.nj.gov.app and you'll get alert notifications. And again, you can also set your phone that you don't want every notification. You might only want them to be delivered once a day, or you want only, say, you can tell them what notifications you want to receive, because you may not want your phone going off at 2 a.m. That the governor just found out something. I'm not saying, again, we want to respect our governor, but I can wait till 9 a.m. or 8 a.m. to hear it. I don't need to hear something that happened in the middle of the night. But anyway, so you can set it, but it's a great resource that we have in New Jersey that's free for us. And again, it's going to be New Jersey specific news, which I think is important. I want to thank you. Okay. We did leave time. We have about another 20 minutes for some Q&A or some comments, but I appreciate you being here. I appreciate the invitation that came from your group to return. I always feel if I get invited back, it's kind of like, the relative gets invited back for dinner. It's like, so I'm like, I always like getting to visit with the group again. So I'm very happy that we had a number of seminars that we were able to offer to you. And as I mentioned before, this is not a commercial, but if you are working with another group that you think would benefit, and you can help to arrange that, we have just like ADAP provided the technical assistance, we'll provide the content assistance, and we can also set you up with a Zoom to bringing other people. We're talking about a group, maybe, anywhere from, 20 to up to, we can do up to 500. But, if you think it's going to be beneficial, that it can be this particular presentation, any of the other presentations. We also in Essex County, well, statewide, I'm doing a presentation for resiliency for business owners. So that might be something if you're interested, if you also own a business or have business owners, you can contact me. We'll make sure you get information about that webinar when it broadcasts. And it'll also be listed on our website, okay? So again, thank you very much. I wanna honor the work that you do. I sincerely appreciate being invited back, but more importantly, it's amazing the work that you are doing. I don't get to talk with you all individually, but I see on the news and I hear from different communities what's going on and how we're helping each other. And that's really the true spirit of what we need to do to keep that support going for each other is beneficial. So thank you. And just in closing, that is my contact information. If you call my voicemail, I'm not in the office. I do check my messages, but it's better to email me actually if you have a need. Okay, thank you very much. And we're going to open it up now. I think, Guerrero, you're going to be moderating. Is that true?
It is, Phil. It
From
is.
last time. Okay.
Yes. So
I
thank
should
you
stop
so much.
sharing now.
You can.
And we're going to invite people, encourage people to open up their video cameras. I'll let you take it from there then. Okay.
Yes. So we'll ask you to raise your hands. But in the interim, if you have any questions that you would like to pose to Phil, please add them in the Q&A. And what we're going to do, we're going to take a small break, Phil, just a stretch break, reactivate ourselves break. Look, I'm going to be honest, I'm fading anytime there's a whole day of Zoom. I just get a little different than I am when there isn't a full day of Zoom. So if we can cue some music and enjoy some chair dancing, jump up, run around. We're just going to give you a minute to kind of re-energize yourself, and we'll be back with you in about 45 to 50 seconds. No matter where we are today, there's always a room for a little bit of celebration. Even though we're on the topic of grief and loss, we are here, we are present. There are some good aspects about life and about what we're experiencing. So it is a time to celebrate. So hopefully you were able to steal a couple of moments to just stretch or run, jump, or I turned my camera off because once that was played, I had to do a little cheer dancing just to re-energize myself. So hopefully you were able to do the same. Again, we want to thank you, Phil. You are like family. You are always invited to the cookout, to the party, to our events, because you always bring a wealth of information, and we love the practical aspects of how you introduce the material and its relevancy. So thank you again, Phil. So you're welcome. So if we have any questions, we would love to challenge or present them to Phil at this time. Or if there's a statement or a comment, you can put the comment or statement in the chat box. Specifically, we're asking for questions in the Q&A. We would love to facilitate that. Some of the things I heard that I thought was significant is grief and loss, particularly in COVID-19, has presented itself differently from how we typically may have experienced it. The coworker loss, sometimes the community loss, or multiple community losses. The trauma and grief has been so continuous. We're in COVID-19, and then there's different other aspects of loss that's happening, whether it's financial, not to get political, but there's some racial undertones that are complicating some of the healing, and that is would be typical in a pandemic. So there's a lot going on, and then you add our regular stressors. Some are experiencing job loss. Youth and children are experiencing loss of socialization. They're not able to express themselves or articulate it, as our morning session indicated. So there's a lot that's happening, and it's persistent. I appreciate Phil also acknowledging for our best mental, emotional, and psychological health, we don't need to have continuous updates. I know that's something I discovered about myself probably a little late in the game, probably like around May, was like, you know what, turn the phone alerts off, turn the pop-ups off, and then I begin to monitor how often I check in to update myself regarding all of the statistics and where we are and what's happening, not just locally, but throughout the state, and then throughout the country and globally. So, so one of the takeaways I always think is monitor, assess what's well for you, and be guided accordingly by the industry and CDC standards regarding the communicability and protecting ourselves and those that we care about. But to identify coping mechanisms that work for you. I think Phil articulated that too, to think about what has worked in the past, and you reinvent those. You take that and you apply it to how you're navigating COVID-19 now and as it continues. I'm not a medical person or a scientist, but I don't see it leaving before 2020. So it's here to stay for a little while. So we have to really be mindful of instituting coping mechanisms that are going to be that's going to help us navigate and help us be well to ourselves, so that we can continue to help others and support others and care for others. All right, so it looks like we have no questions, Phil. I can't believe that. I'm going to attribute it to it being a Thursday afternoon at 3:30. Exactly. It is not an attribute at all of your content and your presentation. It is just, and we get zoomed out a little bit. I mean, that's That's a reality. I've turned Zoom, which was a brand, now into a verb.
Right?
But here we are. Here we are. So
remember Aretha Franklin sang the song, "Who's Zooming Who?"
Yes, yes. And so I'm going to challenge you, Phil, because I think I had this presented this to Jessica and Joelle way back pre-COVID. Do you remember Zoom, the show? Zoom, Zoom, Zoom. Okay, so I'm not going to sing it, y'all, because I can't sing. But Zoom has so many iterations now, and to recognize it's our platform for maintaining some.
Okay.
So we do have a question. Yeah.
Go ahead. You want to read it? Go ahead.
Oh, okay, sure. How can staff advocate for management to staff needs to manage grief and the struggle during the current pandemic?
Sorry, to support staff needs.
Oh.
Yeah, I should have typed that correctly. But how can the question that was phrased was, how can staff advocate for their management to support their needs to manage grief and the struggle that they're dealing with during the pandemic? Sorry about that.
Yeah.
I was typing too fast to make sure I caught you.
It's an excellent question, and it's definitely a challenge of this pandemic. And we saw this, I saw it first within our nursing community, because nursing, by their discipline and by their training, are told you show up for your shift no matter what. You know, there's no just saying, I can't make it today. And when nurses came on duty, there was a shortage of personal protective equipment, PPEs. You know, and many hospitals said, well, this is what you can do. And the nurses said, I don't think that's really going to work, you know? So of course it was a challenge, but the organizations that opened up direct communication were the ones that were much more successful, which became much more resilient. So I think the question is, how can the staff advocate? Well, I believe, you know, people need to find their voice, and administration or leaders need to find their ears and be willing to listen. There may be a time and a place where it might be more appropriate to have that conversation. And again, in my unit at the School of Public Health, we have a staff meeting that's only about a half hour we had it every day, and now we're doing it maybe 2-3 times a week, because we know we're being pulled into so many other directions, but we check in with each other. But on Friday is still our fun day, you know, and we play games on Kahoots, and everybody makes it. But the thing is that, so we recognize all the different needs that we have. So the challenge is, if you're in an organization that is not supporting you enough, then that needs to be brought to the attention of those that are in the power to make those decisions. You know, if that power is the end all be all, it's much more of a challenge. But I think even then there's a way that we can approach someone and say, there's something else we need to talk about. What we're feeling right now is underappreciated, undervalued. When I went to, part of my work is I went to the Caribbean following the hurricanes. And some of the challenge for this professional staff working there in not every facility, because I met with many different people from different facilities, the facilities that said that their staff felt underappreciated were the ones that were experiencing the most stress and the most burnout. So I think, you know, and that's why we're doing this presentation for small business owners to help, so agencies can also benefit. And I've done presentations where I did it for the staff and the leadership didn't come to the presentation on resiliency. That's really unfortunate. But there's ways to communicate to someone what an organization can do to improve their resiliency. So I'll be happy to include a handout that I have that talks about organizational resiliency. And again, if someone's not listening to you and they're in that position of leadership within your organization, you can still pass that on and say, hey, you know what? This guy from Rutgers, he's a big know-it-all. He told us about organizational resiliency, gave us this handout. I'm just going to give it to you to do with what you want, but it's going to open the door to communication, okay?
Well, and I can add to that, Phil, great comment, great feedback. Most organizational structures have EAP services as well. So some of the organizations I've been involved with taking advantage of that. And as opposed to using it individually, they are now having group therapy, group sessions where people can kind of unpack and practice or learn, develop some skills, some techniques that will help them as a team and as individuals. So if you're in an organization, pretty much if you have a healthcare plan through your organization, there are some employee assistance programs that could facilitate this. And even if it does fall on deaf ears for your managers or those that make those decisions, that will be another vehicle to utilize as well, your EAP.
Yeah, we did this at Rutgers. We've had several meetings already on racism and what we can do to improve, connectiveness and to acknowledge where people in academia felt they weren't being listened to if they were part of a minority group. I mean, those are the necessary conversations we need to have. And there are groups that are having them, and there are also facilitators and moderators that can help you. So there's other ways, whatever it may be with COVID, be it with racism, be it with sexism, be it with the whole political climate, there are people that can come in through your EAP services or from your community services, can come in and help you to facilitate some of that conversation. But we are learning, and as I used the example of the nurses before, the hospitals that learned to listen were the ones that their nurses felt empowered to do their job appropriately and in a healthy way, and were better able to respond also. So it improves the whole organization. It's not just for, and that improves the outcome. The whole thing we talk about, the model that I work from is what's referred to as continuous quality improvement. So how do we improve the quality of what we're delivering when we improve the morale of the individuals who are providing the services? And then we'll have better satisfaction from our patients or from our clients or from our customers.
Agreed.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Phil. That's a great question.
Is there anything else? I don't want to stretch it out. I'm happy to be here, but I mean, it's been a long day, I'm sure, for everybody.
I don't see anything in the chat box or in the Q&A. So we will proceed to
Thank you, Jessica, for all your doing all the technical behind the scene work. I'm sure when you started with Family Connections, you didn't think this was really going to be part of your job also. I mean, I don't
think any of us.
I could arrange a few trainings. That's what I was told. I'm like, I can do that. I arrange trainings. Yeah, I've been doing that for 30 years, but now doing it on Zoom and all these other programs is quite a challenge. Okay. Mm-hmm. Thank you all. Thank you everybody that works on it and all the work that you're doing. All right. Bye.
So just to close out, we just have a few announcements.
Okay, go ahead.
If you can use your smartphone to hover over this QR code, and if you just hover over it and then a link pops up, you can click on that link and that will open our Eventbrite page with all of our upcoming events. I just thought this was easier than trying to memorize all the other events. Our events are also posted on our Facebook page, events page at essex.adapt. So tomorrow at 5 p.m., we're having our Incorruptible Essex Youth Kickoff event. So if you know of any youth ages 13 to 18 who are living or going to school in Essex County, they're invited to attend our event and to learn more about prevention and how to help out the community, and they can get community service hours and other leadership skills with this program. October 23rd, so starting tomorrow through October 31st through Halloween, Red Ribbon Week is happening. If you would like some information about virtual activities to do with youth, you can contact Emmeline at efalcone@familyconnectionsnj.org. October 27th, next Tuesday at 7 p.m., we're having a webinar, Building Resiliency to Reduce Substance Use Disorder During the Pandemic, with our partners at the Family Connections Substance Abuse Program. So you don't want to miss that. And November 10th, we're starting for the first time a virtual WISE Older Adults program. We've had the WISE program pre-pandemic in person, and now we're going to have it available virtually. So you don't want to miss that. That's a 6-week program. It's an hour per week, and it has a lot of great sessions on improving health. And it's a great opportunity for older adults to get together, 60 and plus, to get together and share and learn some new things and connect with other adults, older adults. And lastly, you're invited to our Interfaith Committee meeting if you'd like to join us. Our next meeting is November 10th at 10 a.m. So all these events can be accessed, like I said, if you hover over this QR code or using the link that's on the page. And lastly, next week is our final day of our symposium. It's been great having this up to this point, and we look forward to doing some self-care in the morning with Kelly Satcher of Family Connections, and closing out with our resource fair. We're going to have various providers that work in prevention, substance abuse, and mental health to talk about their programs, their resources, their hours of operation, etc. And then we'll close out with some remarks and also have our drawing for our raffle, we're raffling off a restaurant gift card. So you don't want to miss that as well. That's next Thursday. And lastly, please look us up on YouTube at Essex Adapt. Please subscribe to us. All of our sessions for our symposium have been recorded and are available on our site. You can also follow, like, and share us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Use the hashtag 2020 Interfaith Symposium to post any pictures or any information that you liked of the symposium, and tag us at Essex Adapt. When we close out this webinar, you'll be directed to a short survey to just, if you can complete that and let us know how we did and what we can do better. We appreciate your time. We hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you, Phil, for a wonderful presentation and engaging discussion. Thank you, Gwenera, as always, for moderating and engaging us in a think tank piece as well. And Joelle, for all your technical assistance as always and guidance. And thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of the day and a weekend. I'll see you next week. Bye.